who I am. So yeah, Hardin Hewish School, EdTech Demonstrator School. So we're well known for working with Microsoft because we're a showcase school. Actually, obviously, we use lots of different packages, all the way from we have an Apple suite and iPads, dozens and dozens of iPads around the school, and you know, we also use several Google products. But actually, a lot of our experience is with Microsoft. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is actually independent of all of that. So much more around like the big picture and where EdTech could be used. So specifically, we're going to look at potentially how EdTech may help with closing some of the gaps, and we're going to define what the gaps are that I'm talking about. But actually, there are many different aspects to this. So one of the sort of overviews that I wanted to show you, all of this kind of image of a guy looking at a gap, by the way, it does look it's bizarre. I've kept that analogy going the whole way through this. So you know, as the chat moves around, just think, why did he waste his time doing that? And yes, I wonder that as well. So we're going to look at what gaps there actually are. We're going to look at actually the things that EdTech can't help, like relationships and routines, because there are limits to EdTech, as we all know. We're going to look at something that we use EdTech for, which is around the barriers to learning and mapping out where those barriers are. Diagnostic assessments. So this is one of the things that the EEF think is probably one of our best bets for use of EdTech to help us at this point. You know, there's lots of different sorts of diagnostic assessments, actually, from high level standardized tests, retrieval practice quizzing, to classroom based, just real simple, totally informal quizzing. We're also going to go through things like intervention, online tutoring, SEN accessibility tools, parent webinar ideas, in class and at home differentiation ideas, and a few other covers. So first of all, you know, we're an EdTech demonstrator school, but that begs the question, what do we mean by EdTech? Now, if you actually think about the technology we use in school for education, it's everything from the chair that they're sat on and the table through to the paper, the exercise books, the stationery, and the laptop and the internet is just another part of that toolkit. So there are many different things that you can bring into the toolkit, and I want you to see that actually there are things that paper absolutely trumps laptops for, and there are things that exercise books are absolutely fantastic for. So one of the things that I really missed while the schools were closed was an exercise book, because exercise books keep in chronological order a permanent record of what that student's work was so that you can come back to it. And in some ways I was really missing that, and a lot of the EdTech solutions that were out there didn't manage to mimic that very well. Things like reading, God, the power of a book, who doesn't need that? Now, the reason I'm saying this is because I don't want you to think that I am evangelical about EdTech and I don't see all of the other things. I'm sat in front of you here now with a pad of paper and a pen, and I wouldn't be without it. And I wouldn't want our students to be without it either. But there are some areas where EdTech actually can help. It can augment the stuff that we're already doing. It can improve the stuff that we're already doing, as well as these things. So what gaps are we talking about? So these are just a couple of ideas. Now, I was just in a meeting with another primary school, and they were talking about their gaps to do with cultural capital. So the students coming in having not had experiences that the school would normally provide. Now, that might be a gap that you'd already thought about, but it's not the gap that most of the press are talking about. They're talking about the literacy and numeracy gaps, you know, and the EEF have done these studies looking at the gaps in year 2 pupils' attainment and showing that there is now a gap from this year's year 2 compared to previous year's year 2 of around 2 months. And the disadvantage gap is widening even further, around 7 months progress, much wider than normal. But there's more gaps than that. There's gaps to do with relationships and social capital, and gaps to do with aspirations, those things that schools would normally fill in. And some of the things that we're talking about now can be helped with EdTech, but some not. cultural capital, for instance, one of the things we were just discussing was actually how EdTech can help diagnose where there are gaps in cultural capital. So if you can work out who has actually had an experience of a live performance of music, who hasn't, right, okay, let's see, this entire class needs this kind of experience. And that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. So where EdTech can't help, and actually should never pretend to replace, is things like relationships and routines, and they're going to make the biggest difference for students. They're going to raise attendance. The students are going to want to come to school because they love the relationships they've got with their peers and the adults that they're around. They're going to be able to raise their confidence. You're going to be able to deal with their specific needs, and that's, you know, when schools were shut, this is part of the problem. It was what was missing, was these relationships. But the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is diagnostic assessments, and I love this quote. So it's from 1968, which really shocked me. It said, "If I had to reduce all of educational psychology to just one principle, I would say this: the most important single factor influencing learning is what the learner already knows. Ascertain this and teach him accordingly." Why him? I don't know. It doesn't seem very politically correct now. But that principle of find out what they already know before you try and teach them things is maybe the position we're at now. Diagnostic assessments, really important to work out what students actually already know. You know, we use these diagnostic assessments as part of actually a big suite of different things to help work out where our priorities lay when we're looking at students. Now, we use these things called barrier maps. Now, this is like a confusing big old sheet, but really what I'm trying to show you here is that we use technology to bring together lots of what would normally be quite separate data about students to pull together where our priorities lay. So we use things like attendance, behavior, the positive marks that they get, their attainment in English and maths and science, and we pull it all together into one place to say just how concerned we are about a student, or the number of barriers that we know. Now, this is just a basic example, but we've also got barrier maps which take into account things that we know about adverse childhood experiences, things like that. You know, it's the data that would not normally all sit together, and we try and pull it together. But actually, what I'm about to show you about different forms of diagnostic assessment, you can pull that into everything you already know using EdTech packages, and because of the like our EdTech demonstrator school sort of position, we're able to offer the help that you need with whatever you need. So we've got lots of extensive experience of using things like spreadsheets and tracking software. So if you did want a hand with setting up your own kind of barrier maps to pull together attendance data, behavior data, all those things that would normally be separate into one place, we can help you with that as well. All for free, because that's how it works. So diagnostic assessments then. Now this is where actually, this is probably one of our best bets for closing the gaps, is working out where the gaps are to start with. And there are lots of different packages out there to be able to do that. So you may well already as schools be using some of these packages, but for instance, if you were making big school level decisions about where to put your resources, you know, teacher time or tutors or intervention, you may actually want to buy in a package that's maybe a standardized test. So NFER, the GL assessments, welcome assessments, those sorts of things. They often have an online version which is self-marking, so that you can actually ask the students to complete these, and then it will give you diagnostic feedback back as a teacher and tell you, right, this student has these gaps, this student is really strong in these areas, this cohort of students actually need to focus on this particular idea. You know, that can be great for like big holistic ideas, but maybe on a more classroom based level, if you are, say, looking at literacy, actually there are these paper-based tools which are fantastic. Things like the reading fluency scale, the words per minute scale, the handwriting legibility scale, which although they're paper-based, they can still give you data which you can use to work out where your priorities lay. So again, you can pull that into the barrier map. So if you know that you've got a handwriting gap, or if your words per minute are much lower than you're expecting, the reading fluency is lower than you're expecting in one particular area, you can use that. But you can actually use online literacy assessments. Now, the online literacy assessments that I've got linked in there, you know, there's lots of different examples. That one is from the TESS, the Times Educational Supplement. It's a paid assessment again, but it will save you your staff time and yourself time if you're a teacher in actually diagnosing again on a class-based level those gaps. Numeracy wise, so obviously you got the paper-based things like White Rose and Maths Mastery. But actually, you know, just one example of a sort of an EdTech solution out there is things like diagnosticquestions.com. So they use White Rose Maths resources to generate multiple choice questions, which are really carefully thought out. And they will not only just tell you whether a student's got a question right or wrong, they actually look at the nature of the wrong answer that they gave and tell you what that means about what they're thinking about fractions, for instance. So it may mean that, you know, if you've asked them to add two fractions, that they haven't quite understood the concept of the numerator and the denominator. You know, it's that kind of an idea. But also, one of the things that we're working a lot with a lot of the schools that we're supporting on is use of like the things that we're using to assess students' learning at home, like Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, those sorts of multiple choice self-marking things. Actually, they can be really helpful for diagnostic assessment now. So you can create a form yourself and use it with your whole class. Now, we probably all have got more laptops out there than we ever had in our schools before because of the Department for Education scheme. And actually, you could use some of those in some places to be able to run these diagnostic moments to work out, right, okay, how is our maths doing in general? And you could compare the attainment in two classes, 0 marking, feedback very quickly. It will do the analysis for you. It will self-generate Excel spreadsheet so that you can copy and paste that into your own mark sheet. If you're worried about whether it looks like they haven't done any work in their books, actually you can on a parents' evening or in a virtual parents' evening, you can present how well that student did actually much more easily than if it were in a book. But actually, diagnostic assessments can be great for impacting on learning. So Professor Rob Coe, you know, he talks about actually all of these kind of diagnostic assessments. They're going to have an accidental benefit, which is that every time you ask a question, it reinforces the memory for that student. And this kind of retrieval practice concept is most powerful when you use like gamification in quizzing. So although there are paper-based tools for this, worksheets, quizzing from the board, and like whole class feedback methods can be great. Things like Microsoft Forms again, but online quizzing, like we really like Blooket here. I don't know whether you guys have used Blooket before, but it's just a great game that's actually based off of multiple choice questions. Kids go crazy for it, but they're also learning at the same time. Quizzes is similar, because there's power-up aspects, there's sabotaging each other. It really kind of motivates the student to want to answer the questions at the same time. You know, and obviously there are things like, you know, Times Table Rockstars, yeah, lots and lots of things out there which use the same kind of concept, but being a bit more strategic about it and seeing it as a form of assessment that you can do within homework or within the classroom can be really helpful. So diagnostic assessments, I think, is probably one of the places which actually is a best bet for use of EdTech, and EdTech can help because of the lack of marking. So it can actually help in lots of ways as well. So we've kind of discussed this briefly. So intervention and online tutoring. So obviously you've got the National Tutoring Programme out there, but once you've got your diagnostic assessments done, it can help you identify much more clearly which students to target with tutoring. I don't know whether you've looked at it yet, but actually the national tutoring programs work best using EdTech, so allowing students to be able to access tutoring from external tutors. But you actually have a choice of whether you use internal tutors as well. So you could have your own staff supplying tutoring for the students, or intervention on a kind of a small group level. You have a choice in the national tutoring program of whether you go down the national tutors or the mentors programs. And actually you could use EdTech to find out through forms with parent voice which model works out best for them in terms of timing as well. Is it better that it happens in school or out of school, or a hybrid of both? And obviously EdTech is if they're going to access it, you've probably got the devices now to be able to allow them to access that. EdTech though can also help close the gaps in lots of the specific learning needs. So this form that's here, in fact I'll put a link to it in the chat now, for those of you who can see that. That is hopefully one of the most useful sort of areas of EdTech, is actually creating a bit more of a level playing field with accessing learning. Now you can see on there, there's lots and lots of aspects to accessibility, and the form that's there is actually, you know, a good summary of all of those. It would be a whole nother session to talk about all of the different accessible tech there is for education. But, you know, certainly for yourself, Joe, when you're looking at, you know, your role with inclusion, if you haven't seen this stuff from National Star about accessible tech, actually, there'll be one or two little gems in there which may well be transformative. So obviously you've got things like text to speech through things like Immersive Reader. You've got dictations for the students who maybe really struggle with getting down in handwriting what they can easily say in words. You've got things like the enabling screens to be able to make words visible for those who have impaired vision. Similarly, enabling students who've got impaired hearing be able to access learning. Us as a school, we've started using captions in our PowerPoints, and we've started trialing having mics on the teachers, so that as the teachers are talking, what they're saying comes up on the PowerPoint above their heads. And you know, that's something that we would never have done 4 months ago because we didn't know it existed. But there are accessible tech features, you know, I'm talking about the Microsoft ones. There are accessible tech features in Google and Apple as well, which can be really, really useful. So yeah, lots of interesting resources out there, and actually can really help close the gap. And these are gaps that aren't caused by COVID, but have always existed. But actually, because of our new skills with tech, perhaps might be something that's actually benefits from the learning that we've gained as a result. Parent webinars. Now, this is something that, again, because we're now much more used to delivering live content, we've been supporting some primary schools which have actually said that they've started running parent webinars as an alternative to their open classrooms. And now this is to engage particularly the students' families who, you know, you need those on board. And it's been really successful, way off the scale successful in terms of engaging those families who would never before have attended an open classroom. So what they've recommended is this kind of 4-step process with these parent webinars. Now, the parent webinar, you know, I'm just kind of giving you an example of things like how to read with your child, how to help your child with like fractions, with maths, how to help your child with comprehension, how to help your child with spelling, those sorts of things. They might be separate webinars. You might have a year 1 webinar, a year 2 webinar, might have a Key Stage 1 webinar on those things. It may be that you're part of a MAT, in which case you can join together efforts and run your own parent webinars across many schools. But step 1 is agree the format of it. So when you're running these webinars, you might do it through Teams or Google Meet or something like that, Zoom. But you may say, okay, we're going to start with a general discussion about how well the students are doing in the classroom and walking around the classroom, and actually that's the first part. The second part is talking through actually how to help your child, and the third part is playing a video of a class performance, and the fourth part is, you know, it's that kind of thing. Then it's promoting and targeting this to the right families persistently in multiple different ways: text messages, phone calls, emails, text message, phone call, email, again and again and again. Making sure that the first people who are running them share the tips for the next group who are running them, and also the expectations. So it's things like, you know, do you record those sessions? We would recommend that you did, because then you can send those recordings out to the parents who aren't attending so that they can actually watch back again how to read with your child, and that can become part of your resource. Schedule reminders and prepare alternatives. So there may be parents who can't access those live events because they haven't got broadband, a good enough internet connection or device, in which case it may actually be a case of, okay, we are going to run an open classroom for yourselves, and in that case that's much higher impact, isn't it, having one parent come into the classroom. So there you go. In class and at home differentiation ideas to help close the gap as well. So we have used a multitude of different tools to be able to explain to students who aren't in front of us how to do things. Now, we've got them all in front of us, but many of them have different needs in the classroom. Why don't we use the same tools that we used when they weren't in the classroom to explain how to do things when there's only one of us and maybe 2 or 3 different explanations required out there? So, you know, one thing in the center there that we use a lot of is Class Notebook. And actually, we've got now a lot of recorded explanations for how to do things in maths, English, science. And we're now starting to work as a school to pull together those explanations for how to do things so that we can refer to students live in lessons. Okay, I've just recorded my explanation. It's here. I know you haven't understood it. Watch that back and then see if you can have a go at those questions. And we can actually imagine that there may be tables of students where you create a first 10-minute explanation of how to do a more complicated thing. Those students go and sit on a table, they sit around one laptop, they hear you explain it for 10 minutes, they can pause and play, whilst you're actually explaining something else to another 2 tables. And those video tutorials could actually be a really useful resource, even if it's only for that particular year group because you've made it specific for them. But actually, it could be really, really transformative to close those gaps, not just the gaps for the low prioritaners, but also to make sure that your high prioritaners make fantastic progress as well. You know, show them how to do the hardest thing, because you know you're going to be explaining for a long time how to do the basic thing for the students who weren't able to access it at home. So, in summary, there are a lot of different things that EdTech can help with here, and I've just kind of thrown a few threads out there, and hopefully you can start to stitch them all together. But there are lots of things out there which are COVID keepers, skills that we've learnt with EdTech, things that we can make best use of, that actually we don't want to forget. We don't want to let that pass by. We want to grab this moment where we've got the capacity to be, not capacity, maybe capacity is the one thing we haven't got, but we've got the ability to be able to do things, and we've got the need to be able to do these things. So there you go. There's a lot of information there, and hopefully not too much. Now, I have got a couple of references and things that I can share with you, and I'll share the slides along with the video the same way that we sent out the invitation for this session. Okay, did you guys have any questions in particular?
Can I just ask, I think it's the previous slide or two.
I can go back.
The accessible tech for education. Oh no, sorry, quite a lot. Oh, yeah. That one. I've just tried Googling it. I can't find it.
I'll just stop sharing my screen so that I can so I can share with you in the chat if you can see it. I'll send you the link for it. So it's National Star is the it's the kind of the trust who are really leading on this. And if you search for accessible tech, National Science, one of the first links, huge amount of resource out there and experience out there. But that document, which is the document that I snapshotted off, I've just put in the chat as well, if that helps. Have you been able to find it, Jane?
Oh yeah, got it. And your thingy. Yeah, that's quite nice. That it just looks nice as well. It's quite visual, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is good. That's the sort of visual overview you need, isn't it? Because all of those things, it's quite an overwhelming number of things, but because it's presented well, it yeah, it looks like something you might actually be able to digest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you had much experience with kind of things like Immersive Reader or some of the tech tools that are in Microsoft or Google?
No, we do quite a bit of what you mentioned, like the tutoring. We've got a mixture of face-to-face tutoring. Somebody who taught here does face-to-face tutoring where the gaps are, but we also signed up to a scheme where we're doing online tutoring. And we're using the government laptops for that. But when it comes to sort of more using the mic, so we do have office accounts, teachers, not children. I'm not brave enough yet with that. That's sort of where I need to look at a bit more.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, but like I said at the very beginning, you know, there are areas where there are benefits, and then there are areas where it's a distraction, technology, and you know you've got to sort of take things in small chunks. So you know, if you are thinking about getting some students to be able to have access, do it with a small number just to start with, and see what the benefits are of it, and be clear about why you're doing that to start with. You know, I was just working with primary school just before this webinar actually, and they were saying that their Key Stage 2 students have office accounts, but their Key Stage 1 students, they're just now thinking about like grasping that nettle at the moment, just so that when they come to Key Stage 2, they're not having to retrain them to be able to do those things. So
yeah, one of our schools within the MAT is using Goes and Pros, and so that's quite nice that they're sort of trialing that and then sharing that. We have tech meetings together, so they share how they're getting on with that. So that's really good.
Yeah, that is useful. Cool. Did you have any questions, Amanda?
No, I'm all good. No, it's all fine here.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, both of you. Hopefully you both got my email if you needed it, if you had any other questions. We've got another session next week, which is the same kind of model, so 45 minutes again, and you know that one will be on things like the strategic wins that may be gained. So we're looking at things like metacognitive kind of gains that you may be able to make with EdTech, but that's quite quite a grand statement to suggest metacognitive wins, but it is certainly the strategic wins that you may be able to gain with things like working better together as teams, collaborating as staff, sharing documents, those sorts of things as well. All right, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Apologies for the fire alarm interruption.
Bless you, no worries.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.